A frail girl appeared out of nowhere and in panic asked for silence before he entered the room. On the other side of the door, criminals were waiting for him in a perfectly planned kidnapping. But thanks to a child forgotten by the world, the millionaire escaped. If you were touched by this beautiful story of resilience and love, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. Continuing. The autumn sun cast long shadows across the manicured grounds of Westfield. Estate as Harrison Shaw's Bentley rolled up the curved driveway. The imposing gates had parted silently at his approach, a small courtesy programmed into the security system that usually brought him satisfaction. Today, however, Harrison barely noticed. His mind was still reeling from the cancelled merger meeting that had consumed the past 6 months of his life. "That will be all for today, Frank," Harrison said, stepping out of the car without waiting for his driver to open the door. "But sir, I was supposed to take you back to the office after lunch," Frank replied, confusion evident in his voice. "Plans change. Take the rest of the day off." Harrison straightened his bespoke suit and watched as the Bentley disappeared down the driveway. At 58, he still cut an impressive figure, tall and distinguished, with silver-streaked dark hair and penetrating blue eyes that had stared down countless business rivals. As the founder and CEO of Shaw Technologies, he commanded respect in boardrooms across America. His name appeared regularly on Forbes lists, and his opinions on the economy were sought by news networks and politicians alike. But today, for the first time in years, Harrison Shaw felt powerless. The merger with Eastman Corp had fallen through at the last minute. 6 months of negotiations, due diligence and planning, all for nothing. Harrison had excused himself from the aftermath, unable to stomach the sight of his dejected executive team scrambling to contain the damage. They would handle it. They always did. That's what he paid them for. Harrison approached the grand entrance of his Greenwich, Connecticut mansion. The 15,000-square-foot estate, with its stone facade and pristine colonial architecture, was a testament to his success and perhaps his isolation. Since Diana's departure 5 years ago, taking their grown children's loyalties with her, the massive house had felt increasingly empty. Mrs. Reynolds, his housekeeper, wasn't expecting him until evening. Harrison preferred it that way. The thought of a few hours of uninterrupted silence appealed to him. No assistance, no calls, no crisis management. Just silence. As he inserted his key into the lock, Harrison noticed something unusual. The security panel showed green, disarmed. He frowned. The system should always be active when he was away. Perhaps Mrs. Reynolds had forgotten to reset it after accepting a delivery. He made a mental note to address this oversight later. The foyer greeted him with its familiar grandeur, marble floors, a sweeping staircase, and the crystal chandelier that Diana had insisted on installing, despite his protests that it was ostentatious. Now it hung above him like a glittering reminder of everything he'd lost in the divorce. Harrison was halfway across the foyer when movement caught his eye, a small shadow darting between columns. He froze. "Who's there?" he demanded, his voice echoing through the high ceiling. Silence answered him. Then a small face peered out from behind one of the marble columns. A child, a little girl, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, with wide brown eyes and untidy braids. She wore faded jeans and a too-large sweater with a cartoon character he didn't recognize. She looked nothing like the children of his neighbors or associates, whose wardrobes cost more than some people's monthly salaries. "What are you doing in my house?" Harrison asked, his tone softer but still firm. The girl didn't answer. Instead, she stepped out fully from her hiding place, pressing one finger to her lips in the universal gesture for silence. There was something in her expression, not guilt at being caught trespassing, but genuine fear. Harrison took a step toward her, and she rushed forward, grabbing his wrist with surprising strength. Her small hand was cold against his skin. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "don't go in there. They're waiting for you." "What? Who's waiting for me?" Harrison kept his voice low, responding instinctively to her urgency. "Bad men," she whispered, tugging him toward a side hallway. "I heard them talking. They're going to take you away." Harrison's first instinct was to dismiss her words. A child's imagination, perhaps, or some elaborate prank. But something in her eyes, a sincerity, a desperation, made him hesitate. And then he heard it. Voices, male voices coming from his study, speaking in hushed, urgent tones, voices that should not be in his house at 2:30 on a Wednesday afternoon. "When he gets back at 5, one voice was saying. "The car will be waiting at the service entrance." "And you're sure about the security codes?" another voice asked. "Paid good money for them. Trust me, this'll be clean, in and out. The old man won't know what hit him." Harrison felt his blood run cold. The little girl tugged his hand again, pulling him away from the voices and toward the kitchen at the back of the house. "Who are you?" he whispered, as they moved silently across the polished hardwood floors. "How did you get in here?" "I'm Emma," she said simply. "I come sometimes when nobody's home. Mrs. Reynolds leaves food out back for the neighborhood kids. She lets me use the bathroom and wash up sometimes." Harrison was stunned. He had no idea his housekeeper was running some kind of charity operation from his kitchen, yet somehow that seemed utterly unimportant now. "Why didn't you run?" he asked. "When you heard those men?" Emma's eyes flashed with something like pride. "I was gonna. But then I remembered Mrs. Reynolds said you'd be coming home at 5. I waited to warn you." They reached the kitchen, a cavernous space with professional-grade appliances that rarely saw use. Emma led him to a corner behind the massive refrigerator, a space just large enough for them to crouch in relative concealment. "How many men did you see?" Harrison asked, trying to process the situation. 3, Emma whispered. "They came in through the side door. They knew the code." Harrison's mind raced. An inside job, then. Someone had sold his security information. His hand moved to his pocket, relieved to find his phone still there. But who could he call? The police would make noise, alert the intruders. His security team was based at his corporate headquarters, 20 minutes away at best. "They've been planning it for a long time," Emma continued, her voice steadier now that they were hidden. "I heard them say they were going to take you somewhere. Ask for money." A kidnapping, then. Harrison had been briefed about such risks years ago when his company went public and his wealth became a matter of public record. He'd installed security, systems, hired drivers, taken precautions, but he'd grown complacent. And now, if not for this strange little girl, he might have walked right into their trap. "Emma," he said, looking directly into her serious brown eyes. "I need to call for help, but we need to stay quiet. Can you help me?" She nodded solemnly. Harrison pulled out his phone and opened a special app, one that his security chief had insisted he install, but that he'd never expected to use. It would send a silent alert to his security team and to local police, along with his GPS coordinates and a duress code indicating a home invasion in progress. As he activated the alert, Harrison studied the child beside him. She was thin, too thin, with smudges of dirt on her face and clothes that had seen better days. Yet there was a quiet dignity in the way she held herself, an intelligence in her eyes that belied her years. She had risked her own safety to warn a stranger, a wealthy stranger whose house she had been sneaking into, no less. "Why did you wait for me?" he asked softly. "You could have been caught." Emma shrugged, a surprisingly adult gesture on such small shoulders. "Nobody deserves to get hurt," she said simply. "My grandpa says helping people is what makes us human." From the other room they could hear the men moving around, discussing their plans in more detail now. Harrison caught references to a remote location, to demands that would be made, to the fortune they expected to extract from his company in exchange for his safe return. "Smart kid," Harrison murmured, feeling an unfamiliar wave of gratitude toward this strange child who had appeared in his life at precisely the right moment. What Harrison couldn't know then, as they huddled behind the refrigerator waiting for help to arrive, was that this chance encounter would change the course of both their lives forever. That this small, brave girl would fill a void in his existence he hadn't even fully acknowledged. That the man who had everything, yet nothing that truly mattered, was about to discover what wealth really meant. In that moment, though, all Harrison knew was that a child had saved him from disaster. And somewhere deep inside, past the shock and fear, he was already beginning to wonder why. Chapter 2. Hidden Truths. The minutes stretched like hours as Harrison and Emma remained hidden behind the refrigerator. Every sound from the other room made Harrison tense, his hand instinctively moving to shield the small girl beside him. Emma, for her part, displayed a composure that seemed incongruous with her age and circumstances. "They won't find us here," she whispered with the confidence of someone familiar with hiding. "I know all the good spots in this house." Harrison raised an eyebrow. "You've been here before? How many times?" Emma shrugged again, that same adult gesture that made her seem older than her years. "Sometimes when it rains or gets too cold. Mrs. Reynolds lets me warm up in the kitchen. She gives me food to take home to Grandpa, too." "And where is home?" Harrison asked, genuinely curious now. "Pine Street, the blue house with the broken steps." She paused, then added with a hint of pride, "We have a garden in the back. I grow tomatoes." Harrison knew Pine Street. It was in the working-class section of town, far removed from his affluent neighborhood. The contrast between their lives couldn't have been more stark. This child growing tomatoes in a backyard garden, while he had a team of landscapers to maintain his grounds. "My grandpa used to work at the factory before it closed," Emma continued. "Now he can't work 'cause of his heart. I help him when I can." The casual way she spoke of such responsibility sent a pang through Harrison's chest. While his own children had been raised with every privilege, private schools, European vacations, trust funds, this little girl was scavenging for food and caring for an ailing grandparent. A sudden crash from the study interrupted his thoughts. One of the intruders had knocked something over, a crystal paperweight perhaps, or one of the awards that lined his shelves. Accolades that now seemed hollow in the face of real danger. "Did you see their faces?" Harrison whispered. Emma shook her head. "I was hiding in the pantry, but I heard their names. The leader is Mike, the others called him that, and one was really tall with a scar on his hand." Harrison made a mental note of these details, impressed by the girl's powers of observation. His own attention to detail had made him millions in business deals, but here was a child who had absorbed crucial information while hiding in fear for her life. "How did you get in today?" he asked, realizing he'd never seen any security breaches. "On his system reports." "There's a loose panel in the fence by the old oak tree," Emma explained, "and the kitchen door doesn't always latch right if you push it a certain way. Mrs. Reynolds knows. She leaves it that way on purpose, I think." Harrison made another mental note, this time to have a serious conversation with his housekeeper about security protocols, though he couldn't bring himself to feel angry about her apparently routine kindness to this child. "They're saying they have a van," Emma whispered, her ear tilted toward the study. "They're gonna take you somewhere far away." Harrison strained to hear, catching fragments of conversation. "Remote cabin, 3 days minimum, offshore accounts." His phone vibrated silently in his palm. A text from Nathan Briggs, his head of security. "ETA 7 minutes. Police coordinated, stay hidden." "Help is coming," Harrison whispered to Emma. "We just need to stay quiet a little longer." Emma nodded, drawing her knees up to her chest. For the first time, Harrison noticed a small tremor in her hands, the only visible sign of her fear. This child, who had waited to warn a stranger of danger, who had risked her own safety to protect him, was finally showing the strain of their situation. Without thinking, Harrison reached out and took her small hand in his. Her fingers were cold, and he enveloped them completely in his larger, warmer grip. Emma looked up at him, surprise flashing across her face before she gave him a small, grateful smile. They sat in silence, hands linked, listening to the men in the other room finalize their plans for a kidnapping that would never happen. Harrison found his thoughts drifting to Diana and their divorce, to his children who rarely called, to the empty rooms of this massive house that echoed with his solitary footsteps. When was the last time he had held someone's hand like this? When was the last time he had offered comfort or received it? "My mom used to say that bad things sometimes lead to good things," Emma whispered suddenly. "Like when our car broke down and we had to walk 3 miles in the rain, but we found a dog that became our best friend." Harrison looked at her. This child philosopher with her simple wisdom. "What happened to your mother?" he asked gently. Emma's face clouded. "She got sick when I was 4. Grandpa says she's watching over me from heaven now." "I'm sorry," Harrison said, meaning it. "It's okay, I still have Grandpa. He tells me stories about her every night." Emma paused, then asked, "Do you have kids?" The question caught Harrison off guard. "Yes," he said after a moment, "a son and a daughter. They're grown now. Tyler lives in California. He designs video games. And Megan is in Europe, studying—" "Do they visit you?" The simple question hit with unexpected force. "Not often," Harrison admitted. "We're not very close." Emma seemed to consider this. "That's sad," she said finally. "Being alone is the worst feeling." Coming from anyone else, the observation might have seemed presumptuous or pitying. From this child, it was simply truth, unvarnished and genuine. Harrison felt something shift inside him, a recognition of a void he had been ignoring for years, filling it with acquisitions and achievements instead of connections. Before he could respond, his phone vibrated again. Another text from Nathan. "In position, stay where you are, 60 seconds. "They're here," Harrison whispered to Emma. "My security team and the police, we need to stay very still now." Emma's eyes widened, but she nodded, squeezing his hand tighter. They heard a new sound from the front of the house, the faintest click of the front door being carefully opened, then silence, professional silence. What happened next unfolded with military precision. There were short, sharp commands, the sounds of struggle, men shouting in surprise and anger. No gunshots, just the efficient sounds of trained professionals neutralizing a threat. "Police on the ground now. Don't move, hands where we can see them. Clear the room, check the perimeter." Within minutes, Nathan Briggs's voice called, "Out, Mr. Shaw. Sir, are you in the house?" Harrison finally released Emma's hand and stood up stiffly from their hiding place. "In the kitchen, Nathan," he called back. Heavy footsteps approached and Nathan appeared, tall, imposing, his expression shifting from professional concern to confusion as he took in the sight of his employer emerging from behind a refrigerator, with a small, disheveled child. "Sir, are you all right?" Nathan asked, his eyes darting between Harrison and Emma. "I am, thanks to this young lady," Harrison said, placing a gentle hand on Emma's shoulder. "She warned me about the intruders and helped me hide until you arrived." Nathan's professional demeanor faltered for just a moment as he processed this information. "I see. The police have the suspects in custody. They'd like to speak with you when you're ready." Harrison nodded. "Give us a moment, please." As Nathan withdrew, Harrison knelt down to Emma's eye level. "You saved my life today," he said softly. "Thank you." Emma looked embarrassed by his gratitude. "Anyone would have done it," she mumbled. "No," Harrison said firmly. "Not anyone. What you did was extraordinary, Emma, and I won't forget it." A police officer appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Mr. Shaw, we need to take your statement now, and—" She glanced at Emma. "We'll need to know about the child as well." Harrison straightened up. "Her name is Emma," he said, "and she's the reason I'm alive right now." As they followed the officer into the now secured living room, Harrison kept his hand protectively on Emma's shoulder. The men who had planned to kidnap him were gone, taken away in police cruisers. His home was once again safe. But something fundamental had changed. Harrison looked down at the small girl beside him, at her worn clothes and untidy braids, at the quiet dignity in her bearing despite her circumstances. A child who had risked everything to help a stranger. A child who grew tomatoes in a backyard garden and cared for her ailing grandfather. A child who knew the pain of loss and the reality of struggle, yet still believed that bad things could lead to good things. In that moment, Harrison Shaw, a man who had spent decades acquiring wealth, power, and status, realized he had been given something far more valuable than anything in his investment portfolio. He had been given a second chance, a chance to remember what truly mattered, a chance to fill the emptiness that no amount of success had been able to touch. And as Emma looked up at him with those wise, trusting eyes, Harrison made a silent promise, not just to help this child, but to learn from her, to rediscover the humanity that his pursuit of wealth had slowly eroded. Little did he know how deeply their lives would soon become intertwined, or how completely this chance encounter would transform them both. Chapter 3. Worlds Apart. Fool. Next few hours passed in a blur of police statements, security assessments, and urgent phone calls. Through it all, Emma remained by Harrison's side, quietly observing the commotion with wide, attentive eyes. She answered the officers' questions with a directness that impressed even the most seasoned detectives, describing what she had heard and seen with remarkable clarity. "You have quite a memory, young lady," Detective Sawyer commented after Emma precisely recalled a conversation between the intruders that would prove crucial to the investigation. Emma simply shrugged. "My teacher says I notice things other kids don't." By early evening, the police had completed their initial investigation. The 3 men in custody were part of a sophisticated criminal operation that specialized in high-profile kidnappings. They had been monitoring Harrison's routines for weeks, gathering intelligence on his security systems and daily schedule. The fact that he had deviated from his normal pattern by returning home early had been pure chance, or perhaps, as Harrison was beginning to believe, something more like fate. As the police prepared to leave, Detective Sawyer pulled Harrison aside. "We'll need to follow up about how the girl accessed your property, Mr. Shaw. There are some questions about her living situation that need to be addressed." Harrison felt a protective instinct rise within him. "She's not in any trouble, is she? She saved my life." "No, sir, but we have protocols for minors, especially those who may be in vulnerable circumstances. From what she's told us about her home life," Harrison cut him off, "I'll take full responsibility for seeing her home safely, and I'll follow up personally about her situation." The detective looked skeptical, but nodded. "As you wish, mister. Sure, we'll be in touch tomorrow." As the last police car pulled away, Harrison found Emma sitting quietly on a bench in the foyer, her small legs dangling above the floor. The events of the day seemed to have finally caught up with her. Her shoulders slumped with exhaustion. "Are you hungry?" Harrison asked, suddenly realizing neither of them had eaten. Emma looked up. "A little." "Let's see what Mrs. Reynolds has in the kitchen," Harrison said, extending his hand. Emma took it without hesitation this time, and together they walked through the now quiet house. Mrs. Reynolds had been horrified to learn what had happened in her absence. She had been out grocery shopping when the incident occurred and returned to find police cars surrounding the estate. Now she bustled around the kitchen, preparing a meal that could have fed 10 people instead of 2. "I had no idea she was coming." "Into the house, Mr. Shaw," Mrs. Reynolds said anxiously, as she set plates of roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and green beans before them. "I've been leaving food out back for some of the neighborhood children, but I never—" "It's all right, Catherine," Harrison interrupted gently. "If you hadn't shown kindness to Emma, I might not be here right now." Mrs. Reynolds looked at Emma with newfound respect. "Well then, thank you, young lady. You must be a very brave girl." Emma, already halfway through her mashed potatoes, blushed at the praise. As they ate, Harrison observed Emma more carefully. Now that the immediate danger had passed, he could see signs of neglect that had escaped his notice earlier. Her clothes, though clean, were worn thin and at least one size too small. Her sneakers had holes at the toes covered with what looked like duct tape, and while she ate with good manners, there was an intensity to her consumption that spoke of someone unaccustomed to regular meals. "Emma," Harrison said gently, "tell me more about your grandfather." Between bites, Emma painted a picture of life with Stanley Mitchell, a former factory worker sidelined by heart problems 3 years earlier. They lived on his meager social security checks and whatever odd jobs Emma could manage, collecting bottles for recycling, helping neighbors with yard work, and occasionally, it seemed, accepting charity from kind-hearted people like Mrs. Reynolds. "Grandpa doesn't like taking handouts," Emma explained. "He says we get by just fine on our own, but sometimes—" She trailed off, pushing a green bean around her plate. "Sometimes it's hard," Harrison finished for her. She nodded, looking embarrassed. "Does your grandfather know where you are right now?" Harrison asked, suddenly concerned. Emma's eyes widened. "Oh no, I forgot to tell him I'd be late. He's going to be so worried." Harrison checked his watch. Nearly 8 p.m. We should get you home right away. I'll take you myself. 20 minutes. Later, Harrison's Bentley pulled up in front of a small weathered blue house on Pine Street. The contrast between this modest dwelling and his own estate couldn't have been more stark. The front steps were indeed broken, as Emma had mentioned, with the bottom two missing entirely. The yard was neat but sparse, with a few hardy shrubs, struggling against the autumn chill. A dim light glowed from the front window, behind curtains that had likely once been white but had faded to a dull grey. "That's my house," Emma said, pointing unnecessarily. Her voice held no shame, only the simple pride of someone identifying home. Before Harrison could respond, the front door flew open. An elderly man appeared, tall but stooped, his thin frame silhouetted against the light from inside. "Emma?" he called, his voice taut with worry. "Emma, is that you?" "It's me, Grandpa," Emma called back, already scrambling out of the car. She ran up the walkway, nimbly navigating the broken steps, and threw herself into her grandfather's arms. "I'm sorry I'm late." Stanley Mitchell clutched his granddaughter tightly, relief evident in every line of his body. Then his gaze lifted to the luxury vehicle parked at his curb, and his expression changed to one of suspicion and concern. Harrison stepped out of the car slowly, aware of how he must appear to this man, a stranger in expensive clothes emerging from a vehicle. "That cost more than this house was worth. Mr. Mitchell," he said, approaching cautiously. "My name is Harrison Shaw. Your granddaughter did something extraordinary today. I wanted to make sure she got home safely, and to thank you personally." Stanley Mitchell's weathered face registered confusion. "What's he talking about, Emma?" he asked, his arm still protectively around the girl's shoulders. Over the next half hour, sitting in the Mitchells' small living room, the story unfolded. The room was clean but sparsely furnished, with a sagging couch, a recliner that had seen better days, and a small television that looked at least 15 years old. Family photos lined the walls, many featuring a younger Emma with a woman who must have been her mother. The similarity between them was striking. As Emma recounted the day's events, her grandfather's expression shifted from disbelief to horror to fierce pride. Harrison filled in the details Emma omitted, emphasizing her courage and quick thinking. "She saved my life, Mr. Mitchell," Harrison concluded. "I owe her a debt I can never fully repay." Stanley Mitchell sat back in his recliner, visibly processing this information. He was younger than Harrison had initially thought, perhaps in his late 60s, but illness had aged him prematurely. His hands trembled slightly, and his breathing seemed labored even at rest. "Emma's always been special," Stanley said finally, gazing at his granddaughter with undisguised affection. "Smart as a whip and braver than most grown men I know." He turned to Harrison, his expression hardening slightly. "But I have to ask, what was she doing in your house in the first place?" The question hung in the air, carrying with it implications of trespassing, of lines crossed, of worlds that shouldn't have collided but did. "That's something I'd like to discuss with you," Harrison said carefully. "Your granddaughter has been receiving some assistance from my housekeeper, food mainly. I wasn't aware of this arrangement until today." Stanley's face flushed. "We don't need charity, Mr. Shaw. We get by just fine." "Grandpa," Emma interjected. Softly, "Mrs. Reynolds is nice. She just gives me leftovers that would go bad anyway." Stanley's expression softened at his granddaughter's gentle rebuke. "We've had some rough patches," he admitted to Harrison, "since the factory closed, and my heart hurt well, but we manage." Harrison looked around the small living room again, seeing it with new eyes, not as a symbol of poverty, but as a home, maintained with dignity despite difficult circumstances. The floors were worn but swept clean. The furniture was old but carefully arranged. There were books everywhere, stacked on end tables, lined up on homemade shelves, piled beside the couch. Many appeared to be library books, evidence of minds that hungered for knowledge despite limited resources. "Mr. Mitchell," Harrison said slowly, "I'd like to help you and Emma, not as charity, but as a thank you for what she did today." Stanley straightened in his chair. "That's not necessary." "Please," Harrison interrupted. "At least let me cover any medical expenses you might have. It would mean a great deal to me. A complex series of emotions played across Stanley's face. Pride wrestling with practicality, independence battling necessity. Emma watched her, grandfather anxiously, her small hand resting on his arm. "I can't deny that the medical bills have been challenging," Stanley admitted finally. "But I won't take handouts, Mr. Shaw. I've worked all my life, supported my family. I'm not looking for a free ride." "I understand," Harrison said, respecting the man's dignity. "Perhaps we could discuss some alternatives. Emma mentioned she helps neighbors with yard work. My estate requires constant maintenance. I could use an additional consultant to oversee certain aspects." Stanley's eyes narrowed, clearly sensing the transparent attempt to offer financial support disguised as employment. But before he could object, Emma spoke up. "Grandpa, remember what Mom used to say, sometimes help comes in strange packages, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't accept it." The mention of her mother seemed to touch something deep in Stanley. He gazed at Emma for a long moment, then turned back to Harrison with a slight nod. "We can talk about it," he conceded. "But I want to be clear, Emma is my responsibility. I've raised her since my daughter passed, and I intend to continue doing right by her." "Of course," Harrison agreed. "I would never presume otherwise." As Harrison prepared to leave, Emma walked him to the door. In the dim light of the porch, she looked up at him with those wise, serious eyes that had captured his attention from the first moment. "Will I see you again?" she asked simply. Harrison found himself unexpectedly moved by the question. "Yes," he promised. "You will." As he drove back to his empty mansion, Harrison Shaw, titan of industry, financial genius, solitary inhabitant of a life built on acquisition rather than connection, felt something shifting within him. The contrast between his material wealth and the Mitchell's emotional richness struck him with unexpected force. Stanley Mitchell had little in terms of worldly possessions, but he had Emma's love and respect. He had photographs of happy memories lining his walls. He had books and learning and dignity intact despite hardship. What did Harrison have? A house full of expensive things that held no meaning, children who had grown distant, achievements that suddenly seemed hollow in the face of a child's simple courage and an old man's quiet pride. For the first time in years, Harrison felt the stirrings of something long dormant within him. Not ambition or determination or the drive for success, but something more fundamental. Hope. Hope that perhaps it wasn't too late to find meaning beyond the balance sheets and boardrooms that had defined his existence for so long. Hope that had arrived in the most unexpected form imaginable, a small girl with untidy braids who had risked everything to save a stranger. Chapter 4. New Beginnings. The following week passed in a whirlwind of activity for Harrison Shaw. The attempted kidnapping made headlines across the country, though Harrison's PR team worked diligently to minimize details about Emma's involvement, protecting her privacy at his insistence. The three perpetrators were held without bail, facing charges that would likely keep them imprisoned for decades. Harrison threw himself into action with the same focus and determination that had built his business empire. He had his security team install a state-of-the-art alarm system at the Mitchell home despite Stanley's initial protests. He arranged for the best cardiologist in Connecticut to review Stanley's medical records and develop a comprehensive treatment plan. And he established a trust fund for Emma's education, one that even Stanley's fierce pride couldn't reject, as it was structured to be accessible only for schooling. But more significant than these material interventions was Harrison's personal investment. He found himself driving to Pine Street almost daily, sometimes with a transparent excuse, sometimes with none at all. He brought books for Emma, discovering her voracious appetite for adventure stories and science. He engaged Stanley in conversations about history and politics, respecting the older man's intelligence and perspective despite their different backgrounds. On a crisp Saturday morning, Harrison arrived at the Mitchell home to find Emma on the front lawn, attempting to rake leaves with a tool nearly as tall as she was. Without a word, he parked his car, rolled up the sleeves of his cashmere sweater and joined her. Emma grinned up at him. "Mrs. Jensen next door pays $5 to whoever rakes her yard," she explained, gesturing to the neighboring property. Grandpa usually does it, but his heart's been bothering him today. Harrison glanced toward the house, concern crossing his features. Is he all right? He says it's nothing, but he's resting. Emma's matter-of-fact tone couldn't quite hide her worry. The new pills the doctor gave him make him tired. Harrison made a mental note to follow up with the cardiologist. Well then, he said, picking up a second rake that leaned against the porch, we'd better get to work. For the next hour, they worked side by side, Harrison following Emma's lead as they cleared both yards of autumn leaves. His expensive shoes were soon covered in dirt, his hands developing blisters unused to manual labor. But he found himself laughing more genuinely than he had in years, as Emma regaled him with stories about school and neighborhood adventures. When Mrs. Jensen, a white-haired woman with kind eyes, came out to inspect their work, she did a double take at the sight of Harrison Shaw, whose face occasionally appeared in business magazines, raking leaves in her modest yard. "My goodness," she exclaimed. "Emma, who's your helper?" "This is Mr. Shaw," Emma said proudly. "He's my friend." The simple designation, friend, caught Harrison off guard. When was the last time someone had called him that, without an ulterior motive? In the business world, friend usually meant someone seeking advantage, connection, or favor. But Emma's use of the term was pure, uncomplicated by adult machinations. Mrs. Jensen insisted on paying them both, pressing crumpled $5 bills into their hands despite Harrison's protests. He accepted finally, tucking the worn bill into his wallet with more care than he would have shown a $1,000 check. As they walked back to the Mitchell house, Harrison noticed Emma shivering, slightly in her thin jacket. The November air had grown colder as the afternoon progressed. "Where's your winter coat?" he asked. "Getting a bit small," Emma admitted. "Grandpa says we'll find one at the church donation center next week." Harrison frowned but said nothing, respecting Stanley's pride even as he made another mental note. Inside, they found Stanley in the kitchen, attempting to prepare lunch despite his obvious fatigue. Harrison stepped in, insisting on helping, though his culinary skills were limited to the few dishes he had learned to make during his brief bachelor period between college and his first marriage. "Never thought I'd see a billionaire making grilled cheese in my kitchen," Stanley remarked, watching Harrison navigate the unfamiliar territory of a home stove. Harrison laughed. Hardly a billionaire and barely making grilled cheese from the looks of it, he flipped a sandwich to reveal a charred underside. Emma giggled, and even Stanley cracked a smile. The three of them ate together at the small kitchen table, the uneven sandwiches supplemented by canned soup. Harrison couldn't remember the last time he'd enjoyed a meal so thoroughly. As they ate, Stanley studied Harrison with thoughtful eyes. "Why are you really here, Mr. Shaw?" he asked finally. "Not just today, but all week. You've done more than enough to thank Emma. What is it you want?" The directness of the question startled Harrison. In his world of corporate diplomacy and calculated interactions, such bluntness was rare. "I'm not entirely sure," Harrison admitted, surprising himself with his honesty. "I suppose I've been lonely. My house is large but empty. My children call out of obligation, not desire. I've accomplished everything I set out to do professionally, but—" He trailed off, searching for words. "But success doesn't keep you." "Warm at night," Stanley finished quietly. Harrison looked up, meeting the older man's eyes. "Exactly. And you think Emma and I can fill that void?" There was no accusation in Stanley's tone, just genuine curiosity. "I think Emma reminded me of what matters," Harrison said slowly, "when she risked her safety to warn me, a stranger, who represented everything she didn't have. It made me question every value I've lived by for decades. I suppose I'm trying to understand what she has that I've lost." Stanley nodded, seeming satisfied with the answer. "She has her mother's heart. My Laura was the same way. Saw the good in everyone, couldn't stand by when someone needed help." His voice softened at the mention of his daughter. "When we lost her to cancer, I thought that light had gone out of the world. But then I look at Emma and there it is again." Emma, who had been quietly listening to this adult conversation, reached out and took her grandfather's hand. The gesture was so natural, so full of uncomplicated love, that Harrison felt like an intruder witnessing something precious. "Mr. Shaw," Stanley said suddenly, Would you and Emma like to see Laura's garden? It's not much this time of year, but it was her pride and joy. Emma's kept it going. The invitation felt significant, a door being opened, if only slightly. Harrison nodded, understanding the honor being extended. The backyard was small, but meticulously maintained. Raised garden beds, clearly handmade, contained the remnants of the summer's harvest, a few hardy herbs, late-season squash, and what Emma proudly identified as her tomato plants, now mostly brown from the frost. "Mom started this garden when I was a baby," Emma explained, leading Harrison through the narrow paths between beds. "Grandpa built all these boxes for her. He says growing things heals the soul." Harrison listened as Emma pointed out where each vegetable grew, her plans for spring planting, the corner reserved for flowers, just because they're pretty. Her knowledge was impressive, her enthusiasm infectious. Stanley watched from the back steps, his face a complex mixture of pride and melancholy. "Laura would have wanted her to have more than this," he said quietly when Emma was out of earshot. "A proper education, opportunities, security. Things I can't provide, not the way things are." Harrison turned to face him directly. "What if I could help with that? Not as charity, Stanley, but as an investment in Emma's future. She's extraordinary. She deserves every chance to develop her potential." Stanley was silent for a long moment, watching his granddaughter as she knelt to examine something in one of the garden beds. "What exactly are you proposing?" Over the next hour, as Emma tended to her garden, the two men talked. Harrison outlined a vision that had been forming in his mind all week: tuition at the best private school in the area, a college fund, medical care for Stanley, repairs for the house. In return, he asked only for the opportunity to be part of Emma's life, to mentor her, to provide the guidance and support his own children no longer accepted from him. "She needs a male figure in her life who might be around longer than I will," Stanley said bluntly, his hand unconsciously moving to his chest. "The doctors don't say it outright, but I know my heart's getting worse, not better." "Don't talk like that, Grandpa," Emma said, having returned to the steps in time to hear his last comment. She wrapped her arms around his waist, pressing her cheek against his side. "You're going to be fine. The new doctor Mr. Shaw found is going to make you all better." Stanley stroked her hair gently. "Of course, sweet pea. I'm just being a grumpy old man." But over Emma's head, his eyes met Harrison's, communicating an adult understanding of realities too harsh for a child to bear. That evening, as Harrison prepared to leave, Emma presented him with a small gift, a smooth stone painted with swirls of blue and green. "I made it in art class," she explained. "It's for your big empty house, so you have something colorful." Harrison accepted, the painted rock with the same reverence he would have shown a priceless artifact. "Thank you, Emma. I'll keep it on my desk where I can see it every day." As he drove home, the small stone beside him on the passenger seat, Harrison reflected on the strange turn his life had taken. A week ago, his thoughts had been consumed by merger negotiations and stock prices. Now, he found himself contemplating school districts and heart medications, garden plots and winter coats. The shift should have felt jarring, even unwelcome. Instead, it felt like waking up after a long, dreamless sleep. When he arrived home, the estate seemed different somehow, not smaller, but less significant. The marble foyer where he had first encountered Emma now reminded him of her courage, rather than his wealth. The kitchen where they had hidden recalled not danger but connection, her small hand in his as they waited for rescue. Harrison placed Emma's painted stone on his desk in the study, its vibrant colors standing out against the muted browns and grays of his sophisticated decor. It looked out of place, childish, homemade, imperfect. Yet somehow it belonged there more than the expensive art pieces that lined his walls. He sat in his leather chair, contemplating the small token and all it represented. A child's gratitude, a simple gift, given without calculation or expectation. Her splash of color in a monochrome existence. Harrison Shaw, who had spent a lifetime accumulating wealth and influence, found himself deeply moved by a painted rock that had cost nothing but time and thought. The irony wasn't lost on him. Perhaps this was what he had been seeking all along. Not more possessions or achievements, but meaning, connection, purpose beyond the accumulation of zeros in a bank account. As he prepared for bed that night, Harrison made a decision. The Mitchell family had given him a precious gift, a glimpse of what truly mattered. Now it was his turn to give something back, not just financial support, though that would certainly be part of it, but something more essential. A second chance for all of them. What Harrison couldn't know as he drifted off to sleep with newfound resolve was that his decision would face unexpected challenges in the days ahead. That the worlds he was attempting to bridge, his own of privilege and power, and the Mitchells of struggle and simplicity, would not merge without resistance. That his own past would resurface in ways that threatened the fragile new connections he was forming. But for that night, at least, Harrison Shaw slept more peacefully than he had in years, with Emma's painted stone keeping watch from his bedside table, a small, colorful harbinger of change. Chapter 5. Resistance and Revelations. The first sign of trouble came in the form of a phone call. Harrison was in a board meeting when his assistant interrupted with an urgent message. Emma's school had been trying to reach him. He excused himself immediately, a knot of worry forming in his stomach. "Mr. Shaw, this is Principal Delaney from Pine Street Elementary. You're listed as Emma Mitchell's emergency contact." Harrison had added his name to Emma's school records just the week before, with Stanley's permission. "Yes, is everything all right?" "There's been an incident. Emma's fine physically, but we need someone to pick her up. Her grandfather isn't answering." 20 minutes later, Harrison found Emma sitting in the principal's office, her usual confidence replaced by a subdued demeanor he hadn't seen since the day of the attempted kidnapping. Her clothes were muddy, and a scratch marked her cheek. "What to you happened?" he asked gently after signing the necessary forms. Emma stared at her scuffed shoes. "Nothing." Principal Delaney, a tall woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, explained. "Emma was involved in an altercation with several classmates during recess. Words were exchanged, and it became physical." Emma. Harrison couldn't reconcile this information with the thoughtful, mature child he had come to know. "They were saying things," Emma muttered, "about me, about Grandpa, about you." In the car, the full story emerged. Word had spread about Emma's connection to Harrison Shaw, exaggerated as such things often are when filtered through the playground grapevine. Some children had accused her of making up the story about saving Harrison's life. Others suggested more sinister reasons for a billionaire's interest in a poor girl from Pine Street. When one boy had made a particularly crude comment, Emma had pushed him. He pushed back. The situation escalated from there. "I'm sorry," Emma said, her voice small. "Grandpa always says fighting doesn't solve anything, but they wouldn't stop. They said you were only being nice to me because—" She trailed off, unable to repeat the cruel insinuations. Harrison gripped the steering wheel tightly, anger rising within him, not at Emma, but at the casual cruelty of children and the adults whose whispers had undoubtedly fueled their taunts. "You have nothing to apologize for," he said firmly. "Those children were wrong to say those things, but you're right that fighting isn't the answer. We'll figure out a better way to handle this." When they arrived at the Mitchell home, Harrison was concerned to find Stanley hadn't answered the school's calls because he was having one of his bad days, too exhausted to do more than move from bed to couch. The new medication was helping his heart, but leaving him drained and dizzy. Emma immediately shifted into caretaker mode, getting her grandfather water and making sure he took his afternoon pills. Harrison watched the ease with which he handled these adult responsibilities, his heart aching for the childhood experiences she was missing. That evening, after ensuring Stanley was comfortable and Emma had completed her homework, Harrison made a decision. "Emma, how would you feel about changing schools?" Emma looked up from the book she was reading, one Harrison had brought her about marine biology, her latest fascination. "Change schools? Why?" "There's a school called Westbrook Academy not far from my home. It has small classes, excellent teachers, and amazing science programs. I think you'd love it there." Emma's brow furrowed. But all my friends are at Pine Street. After today, I'm not sure those children qualify as friends, Harrison said gently. Not all of them are mean, Emma protested. Just some, and they're only repeating what their parents say. Her insight into adult behavior was startling. Harrison sighed. That's probably true. But Westbrook could offer you opportunities that Pine Street simply can't. They have robotics, classes, a full science lab, field trips to museums and universities. He could see her interest piqued by these possibilities, but also her reluctance. Would I still live with Grandpa? Of course, Harrison assured her. I'd arrange transportation to and from school each day. Emma glanced toward the bedroom, where Stanley was resting. I don't know if Grandpa would like it. He says public school was good enough for my mom, so it's good enough for me. The comment revealed the complex dynamics at play. Stanley's pride, his desire to raise Emma as his daughter had been raised, his wariness of Harrison's world of privilege. Let me talk to him, Harrison said, when he's feeling better. But the conversation with Stanley proved more difficult than Harrison had anticipated. 3 days later, when Stanley was strong enough for serious discussion, his resistance was immediate and firm. Private school? With all those rich kids looking down on her? Absolutely not. They wouldn't look down on her, Harrison argued. Emma is brilliant. She'd excel there. And stand out like a sore thumb, Stanley countered. The only scholarship kid, the charity case, I won't put her through that. It wouldn't be like that, Harrison insisted. And it wouldn't be charity. It would be an investment in her future. A future Laura would have wanted for her. Stanley's face hardened at the mention of his daughter. Don't you dare use Laura to manipulate me, Shaw. You didn't know her. You have no right. The conversation deteriorated from there, with both men growing increasingly frustrated. Emma, listening from the hallway, finally intervened. Stop fighting, she cried, her small face tight with distress. I don't want a new school if it makes you angry at each other. Her outburst silenced them both, shame replacing anger as they realized how their conflict was affecting her. Stanley opened his arms and Emma ran to him, burying her face against his chest. I'm sorry, Sweet Pea, he murmured, stroking her hair. We're not really angry. We both just want what's best for you. Harrison watched them, the tight knot of father-granddaughter devotion, and felt suddenly like an intruder. For all his wealth and influence, he couldn't compete with the bond between them, forged through years of mutual dependence and love. I should go, he said quietly, rising from his chair. Mr. Shaw, wait, Emma called, pulling away from Stanley. Don't leave mad. Her concern touched him deeply. I'm not mad, Emma. Just thinking that perhaps I've been pushing too hard, too fast. Stanley sighed, the fight seeming to drain out of him. Sit down, Harrison. We're not done talking. Over the next hour, a compromise emerged. Emma would remain at Pine Street Elementary until the end of the semester. In January, she would transfer to Westbrook Academy, not as a charity case, but as the recipient of a newly established scholarship program that Harrison would fund for multiple deserving students from Pine Street and similar neighborhoods. This approach would address Stanley's concerns about Emma's dignity, while still providing her with the educational opportunities Harrison knew she deserved. And you'll come to my science fair next week? Emma asked Harrison as the details were being finalized. I made a project about ocean acidification. I wouldn't miss it for anything, Harrison promised. Later that week, Harrison received an unexpected visitor at his office. Diana Shaw, his ex-wife and mother of his adult children, strode into his corner suite with the same commanding presence she had displayed throughout their 20-year marriage. What on earth are you playing at, Harrison? She demanded, without preamble. Megan called me in a panic, saying you've taken in some child off the street and are playing daddy again. Harrison set aside the report he'd been reviewing. Hello to you too, Diana. I see the European climate continues to agree with you. Diana dismissed his sarcasm with a wave of her manicured hand. Don't change the subject. Tyler says you've gone off the deep end, spending time in some slum, setting up trust funds, getting personally involved with this girl and her grandfather. It's all over the Greenwich gossip circuit. And that matters to you why exactly? Harrison asked coolly. We've been divorced for 5 years. My personal life is no longer your concern. Diana dropped into the chair across from his desk. Despite approaching 60, she remained a striking woman, her silver blonde hair impeccably styled, her slim figure maintained through rigorous discipline. It becomes my concern when my children call me worried about their father's mental state. Or, worse, his financial vulnerability. Who are these people, Harrison? What do they want from you? The question was so fundamentally wrong-headed that Harrison almost laughed. They don't want anything from me, Diana. That's what you and the children have never understood. Not everyone sees me as a walking checkbook. Oh, please, Diana scoffed. Everyone wants something, especially people from that socio-economic bracket. I'm sure they've got quite a scheme worked out. Harrison felt a surge of anger. Their scheme was to save my life. Emma Mitchell, that 7-year-old girl you're so suspicious of, prevented me from walking into a kidnapping attempt. She put herself at risk to warn me, a complete stranger who represented everything she didn't have. So, yes, I am helping, her and her grandfather. Not out of guilt or obligation, but because they've shown me more genuine humanity than I've experienced in decades in our social circle. Diana stared at him, momentarily silenced by his vehemence. You're serious about this? She said finally. This isn't some midlife crisis or publicity stunt. Deadly serious, Harrison confirmed. Emma is exceptional. Brilliant, compassionate, resilient despite circumstances that would crush most adults. She deserves every opportunity I can provide. And Stanley Mitchell is one of the most dignified, principled men I've ever met. Getting to know them has been illuminating. Illuminating how? Diana asked, her hostility fading somewhat in the face of his sincerity. Harrison considered the question carefully. They've made me question everything I thought was important. Emma lives in a house smaller than our guest cottage, wears second-hand, clothes and has responsibilities no child should bear. Yet she's happier, more centered, more genuinely herself than our own children ever were with all their privileges. Diana flinched at the implied criticism of their parenting. That's not fair, Harrison. Tyler and Megan had pressures of their own. The expectations, the scrutiny, the constant comparisons to their successful father. Maybe that's exactly my point, Harrison said quietly. We gave them everything except what they actually needed. Presence, guidance, unconditional love that wasn't tied to achievement. Stanley has nothing material to give Emma, but she knows without question that she matters to him more than anything in the world. A silence fell between them, heavy with shared history and mutual regrets. Diana was the first to break it. The children think you're trying to replace them, she said bluntly, with a more grateful, less complicated version. The accusation stung, partly because Harrison could see how his actions might appear that way. That's not true. I can't replace what I've lost with Tyler and Megan. I know that. But perhaps I can learn from my mistakes, do better this time. By playing benefactor to this girl? By being present. By caring about her development as a person, not just her accomplishments or how they reflect on me. Diana studied him thoughtfully. You've changed, Harrison. I'm trying to, he admitted. When Diana left an hour later, their conversation had evolved from confrontation to something approaching understanding. She remained skeptical about Harrison's involvement with the Mitchells, but seemed less convinced it was a sign of mental instability or impending financial ruin. Just be careful, she warned, as she prepared to leave. Not for your sake, but for the child's. Getting attached to you, becoming accustomed to your world, only to have you lose interest when the novelty wears off, that would be cruel. I won't lose interest, Harrison said firmly. Emma and Stanley aren't a phase or a charity project. They've become, he searched for the right word, family, he finished simply. The week culminated with Emma's science fair. Harrison arrived at Pine Street Elementary, feeling distinctly out of place among the working-class parents in his tailored suit. He had come directly from a board meeting, not wanting to be late. Emma's project stood out immediately, not because of expensive materials or elaborate presentation, but because of the clear, methodical research and genuine passion evident in her explanation of how carbon dioxide affects ocean chemistry. Harrison watched with pride as she confidently answered the judge's questions, her earlier playground troubles seemingly forgotten in the excitement of sharing her knowledge. As he applauded her second-place win, beaten only by a fifth-grader's impressive wind turbine, Harrison noticed Stanley watching him from across the gymnasium. The older man's expression was complex. Gratitude mingled with wariness, pride in Emma tinged with something like resignation. Later, as they celebrated with ice cream cones at Emma's favorite local shop, Stanley pulled Harrison aside while Emma chatted with a classmate. "I need to know your intentions here, Harrison," he said quietly. "Not the scholarships or the doctors or the house repairs, your intentions with Emma, because that girl is already getting attached to you. When you disappear back into your world of mergers and acquisitions, it's going to break her heart." Taku. Question echoed Diana's concerns, but coming from Stanley, it carried different weight. This wasn't about Harrison's mental state or financial vulnerability. This was about Emma's emotional well-being, the only thing Stanley truly cared about. "I'm not going anywhere," Harrison said firmly. "Emma has changed my life, Stanley. She's shown me what I've been missing all these years, focused on building wealth instead of meaning. I know I can't replace her parents, and I would never try to usurp your role in her life, but I want to be there for her, consistently, reliably, for as long as she needs me." Stanley studied him for a long moment, seeming to search for any hint of insincerity. Finally, he nodded. "All right then, but understand this. If you hurt that girl, all your money and power won't protect you from me, heart condition be damned." Harrison had never respected the man more than in that moment. His fierce protectiveness, his willingness to challenge, someone with 100 times his resources in defense of his granddaughter. "I understand completely," Harrison said, extending his hand. Stanley hesitated briefly before shaking it, a tentative truce between two men from different worlds, united only by their concern for one extraordinary little girl. What none of them could anticipate was how soon that truce would be tested, or the unexpected source from which the next challenge would emerge. Chapter 6. Unexpected Storms, the Fire. Holidays approached with a swiftness that surprised Harrison. In years past, December had been merely another month for business, punctuated by obligatory corporate parties and perfunctory gift exchanges. This year felt different. For the first time in memory, he found himself looking forward to Christmas with childlike anticipation. "We always get our tree on December 1st, Emma informed him during one of their now regular weekend visits. "Grandpa says waiting any longer means all the good ones are gone." Harrison, who typically delegated holiday decorations to his housekeeper, found himself driving to a local tree farm on a frigid Saturday morning. Stanley insisted on paying for the modest pine they selected, though Harrison suspected the expense strained his limited budget. The older man's pride remained intact, despite accepting Harrison's help with medical bills and home repairs. Back. At the Mitchell house, Harrison watched in bemused fascination as Emma and Stanley transformed their small living room with well-worn ornaments, each with a story attached. "Mom made this one in kindergarten," Emma explained, showing him a faded construction paper star. "And this angel belonged to Grandma before she went to heaven. We always put her on top." Harrison was struck by the contrast between this intimate, memory-laden ritual and his own sterile holiday traditions. In his home, professional decorators installed designer trees with coordinated ornaments. Everything was perfect, pristine, and utterly devoid of personal meaning. "Your turn," Emma announced, holding out a slightly tarnished silver bell. "You need to hang one too. It's tradition." Harrison carefully placed the bell on a branch, feeling inexplicably moved by this simple inclusion in their family custom. Stanley, watching from his armchair, gave him a nod of acknowledgement, another small step in their evolving relationship. That evening, as Harrison prepared to leave, Emma presented him with a hand-drawn invitation decorated with glitter and candy canes. "It's for our Christmas dinner," she explained. "It's nothing fancy like you're probably used to, but Grandpa makes the best ham, and I'm in charge of the pie." Harrison accepted the invitation with genuine pleasure. "I'd be honored to join you." "Just you, though," Emma added seriously. "Not other fancy people, just family." The casual inclusion of him in the category of family caught Harrison off guard. He glanced at Stanley, expecting objection, but the older man merely shrugged with a half-smile. "You heard the boss," Stanley said. "Just family." The warmth of that moment sustained Harrison through the following days, even as complications arose on multiple fronts. His children, Tyler and Megan, both announced unexpected visits home for the holidays. The first time in 3 years they would be in Connecticut simultaneously. Their timing felt suspiciously deliberate, especially given Diana's recent concerns about his involvement with the Mitchells. Meanwhile, the legal arrangements for Emma's scholarship and transfer to Westbrook Academy encountered unexpected resistance from the school board, which was hesitant to accept a donation with such specific parameters. Harrison's legal team was working through the issues, but the process was proving more complex than anticipated. Most concerning was Stanley's health. Despite the improved medication regimen, his condition seemed to be deteriorating. Harrison noticed his increased fatigue, the bluish tint to his lips after minimal exertion, the way he often paused mid-sentence to catch his breath. When Harrison suggested additional medical consultations, however, Stanley brushed off his concerns. "Doctors can't fix everything," he said with characteristic stoicism. "Some things you just have to live with, or not, as the case may be." The casual reference to his own mortality chilled Harrison. For Emma's sake, he didn't press the issue, but privately he contacted Stanley's cardiologist to explore additional treatment options, regardless of cost. A week before Christmas, the various threads of Harrison's increasingly complicated life converged in an unexpected confrontation. He was hosting a small dinner at his home for Emma and Stanley, their first visit to his estate since the day of the attempted kidnapping. Harrison had deliberately kept the invitation casual, hoping to make them comfortable in his world as they had made him in theirs. Emma was exploring the mansion with wide-eyed curiosity, examining artwork and asking questions about everything from the chandelier to the heated floors. Stanley followed more slowly, his discomfort in these opulent surroundings evident, despite Harrison's efforts to make him feel welcome. They were in Harrison's study, Emma admiring her painted rock, now prominently displayed beside family photos on his desk, when the front door opened, followed by voices in the foyer. "Dad, are you home? Mrs. Reynolds said you were expecting us tomorrow, but we thought we'd surprise you." Harrison froze, recognizing Tyler's voice. Before he could respond, his son appeared in the doorway of the study, his expression shifting from surprise to confusion as he took in the scene, his father with a small girl and an elderly man, clearly not from their social circle. "Tyler," Harrison said, rising from his chair, "I wasn't expecting you until tomorrow." "Clearly," Tyler replied, his gaze fixed on Emma and Stanley. He was 32 now, with the same tall build as his father, but softer features inherited from Diana. Behind him Megan appeared, 28, elegant in designer travel clothes, her expression mirroring her brother's confusion. "Dad, what's going on?" she asked. "Who are these people?" The question, though not deliberately rude, carried an undertone that made Harrison bristle. Before he could respond, Emma stepped forward with characteristic directness. "I'm Emma Mitchell," she said, extending her hand as Harrison had taught her for business introductions. "And this is my grandpa, Stanley. Your dad is our friend. Are you Tyler or Megan? He's told me about both of you." Tyler ignored her outstretched hand, looking instead to Harrison. "Is this the charity project Mom mentioned? The people from Pine Street?" The dismissive characterization made Harrison's jaw tighten. "Emma and Stanley are my guests, Tyler, and I'd appreciate you showing them the respect they deserve." Emma had withdrawn her rejected hand, her expression shifting from friendly curiosity to wounded dignity. Stanley placed a protective arm around her shoulders, his eyes narrowing at Tyler's rudeness. "Perhaps we should come back another time," Stanley said quietly to Harrison. "You clearly have family matters to attend to." "No," Harrison said firmly, "you are not leaving. Tyler and Megan arrived unannounced. If anyone should adjust their plans, it's them." The tension in the room escalated as Tyler scoffed. "Seriously, Dad? You're choosing these strangers over your own children?" "They're not strangers," Harrison countered. "And this isn't about choosing anyone over anyone else. This is about basic courtesy, which you seem to have forgotten." Megan, always more diplomatic than her brother, attempted to diffuse the situation. "Dad, we're just surprised. You have to admit this is unexpected. Maybe we could all have dinner together. Get to know each other." Before Harrison could respond, Tyler interjected, "I'm not having dinner with some random kid and old man Dad picked up in a midlife crisis charity spree. This is ridiculous." "Tyler!" Harrison snapped, but the damage was done. Emma's face had gone pale, her eyes filling with tears she stubbornly refused to let fall. Stanley's expression hardened into something Harrison had never seen before, a cold anger that transformed his usually gentle demeanor. "We'll be going now," Stanley said, his voice steady despite the emotion clearly churning beneath the surface. "Thank you for your hospitality, Harrison, but I think we've imposed enough." "You haven't imposed at all," Harrison insisted, shooting a furious glance at his son. "Tyler is leaving, not you." "Dad, you can't be serious," Tyler protested. "I've never been more serious," Harrison replied. "You will not come into my home and disrespect people who matter to me." The phrase hung in the air. People who matter to me, its implications clear to everyone in the room. Megan looked stricken. Tyler's face flushed with anger and something like hurt. "Fine," Tyler said after a moment. "If that's how you want it. Come on, Megan. We'll go to Mum's place." "Tyler, wait," Megan pleaded, but her brother was already striding out of the study. After a moment of hesitation, she followed, casting an apologetic glance back at her father. In the silence that followed their departure, Harrison felt a crushing weight of disappointment and regret. Not regret for defending Emma and Stanley, but for the broken relationships that had led to this moment, relationships he had neglected for years in pursuit of wealth and success. "I'm sorry you had to witness that," he said finally, turning to Emma and Stanley. Stanley's expression had softened somewhat, though concern still lined his face. "Family's complicated," he said simply. "We understand that better than most." Emma, however, looked devastated. "They hate me," she whispered. "They think I'm trying to steal you away." Harrison knelt before her, gently taking her shoulders. "No, Emma. They don't hate you. They don't even know you. They're angry at me, not you, for many things that happened long before you came into my life. But they think I'm just a charity case," she persisted, the term clearly having struck deep. "Like I only matter because I'm poor and you feel sorry for me." "That is absolutely not true," Harrison said firmly. "You matter to me because you're extraordinary, brave, intelligent, compassionate. Whether you lived in a mansion or under a bridge wouldn't change that." Stanley cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should go home anyway, Emma. Let Harrison sort things out with his children." Emma looked torn, her distress evident. Harrison felt his heart breaking for her, this child who had already experienced so much loss, now feeling rejected once again. "Please stay," he urged. "Mrs. Reynolds has prepared a special dinner. We can eat in the kitchen if that would be more comfortable. Don't let Tyler's rudeness ruin our evening." After some gentle persuasion, they agreed to stay, though the earlier light-hearted atmosphere had been irretrievably damaged. They ate in the kitchen as Harrison had suggested, Mrs. Reynolds joining them with her own stories and questions that gradually helped Emma relax again. Later, as Harrison walked them to his car to drive them home, Emma tugged at his sleeve. "Your kids are mad at you because of us, aren't they?" Harrison sighed, knowing he couldn't lie to her perceptive mind. "They're mad for many reasons, Emma. Some valid, some not. But none of those reasons are your fault." "But if you hadn't met me, if I hadn't met you," Harrison interrupted gently, "I would still be the same lonely, empty person I was before. You and your grandfather have brought meaning back into my life. My issues with Tyler and Megan go back years, long before you came along." Stanley, who had been silent during this exchange, spoke up. "Emma, remember what we talked about? About how people make their own choices and we can't take responsibility for their feelings." Emma nodded slowly. "But I don't want to come between Mr. Shaw and his kids." "You're not," Harrison assured her. "If anything, meeting you has made me realize how badly I failed as a father. How I prioritized achievement over connection. Maybe now I can try to make amends if they'll let me." The drive to Pine Street was subdued, Emma eventually falling asleep in the back seat. As they pulled up to the Mitchell house, Stanley turned to Harrison. "You shouldn't have sent your son away," he said quietly, no matter how rude he was. Harrison bristled slightly. "He insulted you and Emma. I couldn't allow that." "He's your son," Stanley replied simply. "No matter how strained your relationship, that bond is irreplaceable. Trust me on this. I lost my daughter, Harrison. Not to a fight or misunderstanding, but forever. Don't risk the same with your children, not for our sake." The gentle rebuke hit Harrison harder than any angry confrontation could have. Stanley Mitchell, who had every reason to resent Tyler's callous remarks, was instead advocating for reconciliation. His wisdom and generosity of spirit made Harrison's own reactive anger seem small in comparison. "I'll call them tomorrow," Harrison promised. "Try to explain." Stanley nodded, satisfied. "Good. Emma needs to see that families can work through difficulties. That love persists even through conflict." As Harrison helped carry a still drowsy Emma into the house, he marveled at the strange inversion his life had taken. He had initially seen himself as the benefactor, the provider of opportunities and resources the Mitchells lacked. Yet increasingly, he found himself the recipient of their wisdom, their emotional intelligence, their authentic humanity. Later that night, alone in his massive empty house, Harrison stared at the family photos on his desk. Tyler's college, graduation, Megan's art school exhibition, holidays and vacations from years past when they had at least maintained the appearance of familial closeness. Beside these stood Emma's painted rock, humble but somehow more meaningful than all the expensive artifacts that filled his home. Harrison picked up his phone and composed a text to both his children. "I reacted poorly today. I'd like to talk. Tomorrow, just the three of us. Please give me a chance to explain what's happened in my life these past months. I love you both." The response didn't come until morning. A terse okay from Megan, nothing from Tyler. It wasn't much, but it was a start. What Harrison didn't know, as he prepared for the difficult conversation ahead, was that circumstances were already in motion that would force all of them, the Shaws and the Mitchells, to confront painful truths and make choices that would permanently alter the course of their intertwined lives. The real test was just beginning. Chapter 7. Full Circle. The call came at 3:17 a.m. on Christmas Eve. Harrison jolted awake at the sound of his phone, immediately alert in the way of someone accustomed to middle-of-the-night business emergencies, but the number on the screen wasn't a business associate or international partner. It was Emma. "Emma," he answered, alarm sharpening his voice. "What's wrong?" "Mr. Shaw," she sobbed, her voice small and terrified. "It's Grandpa. He can't breathe right. He told me not to call anyone, but he looks really bad and I'm scared." Harrison was already moving, grabbing clothes as he spoke. "Listen to me carefully, Emma. Call 911 right now. Tell them your grandfather is having trouble breathing and has a heart condition. Then call me right back. Can you do that?" "Yes," she whispered. "I'm on my way," Harrison promised. 10 minutes. Less. Harrison made it to Pine Street in 8 minutes, breaking every speed limit. An ambulance was already there, lights flashing silently in the pre-dawn darkness. He found Emma on the front porch, wrapped in a blanket, her face tear-streaked and pale in the harsh emergency lights. When she saw him, she ran, colliding with his legs and holding on as if he were the only solid thing in a world suddenly turned to quicksand. Harrison knelt and embraced her, feeling her small body shaking with fear and cold. "They took him away," she said between sobs. "They wouldn't let me go with him. They said I have to wait for a grown-up relative, but there's nobody else, just Grandpa and me. I'm here now," Harrison assured her, his voice steady despite the anxiety coursing through him. "We'll go to the hospital together." The emergency room at Greenwich Hospital was chaotic even at this early hour, filled with holiday accidents and seasonal illnesses. Harrison's name, however, opened doors. The Shaw wing of the cardiology department bore his family's name, funded by a donation years earlier that he had made for tax purposes, never imagining he would have a personal stake in its services. They found Stanley in the cardiac intensive care unit, pale and diminished against the white hospital sheets, an oxygen mask covering his face, and monitors beeping ominously around him. The attending physician, Dr. Patel, took Harrison aside, while a kind-faced nurse showed Emma how to hold her grandfather's hand, without disturbing the IV lines. "It's not good," Dr. Patel said bluntly. "Mr. Mitchell has experienced severe cardiac decompensation. His heart is failing. We're stabilizing him now, but he needs a procedure, possibly a transplant given the extent of the damage." "Then do it," Harrison said immediately. "Whatever he needs, cost is no object." Dr. Patel's expression remained grave. "It's not just a matter of cost, Mr. Shaw. There are waiting lists, compatibility issues, and frankly, given Mr. Mitchell's age and overall health status, he wouldn't be considered a priority candidate for a donor heart. The clinical assessment felt like a physical blow. So what are you saying? That he's not worth saving?" "I'm saying we have limited resources and difficult decisions to make," Dr. Patel replied evenly. "We'll do everything we can for Mr. Mitchell, but you should prepare the child for the possibility that her grandfather may not recover." Harrison felt a surge of the same fierce protectiveness that Stanley had always shown toward Emma. Prepare? Her. She's 7 years old. Her grandfather is her entire world. I won't prepare her to lose him too. Dr. Patel's expression softened slightly. "I understand this is difficult. We'll continue to evaluate Mr. Mitchell and explore all options, but medically speaking, his prognosis is guarded at best." Harrison returned to Stanley's bedside, forcing his features into a calm mask for Emma's sake. She looked up at him with those wise, too perceptive eyes. "He's really sick, isn't he?" she asked quietly. Harrison couldn't lie to her. "Yes, but the doctors are doing everything they can." Emma nodded, her small hand still wrapped around her grandfather's larger one. "He knew this was coming. He told me last week that his heart was getting too tired. I thought he was just being grumpy." The simple statement, delivered with such adult resignation, broke something inside Harrison. This child had already lost her mother. Now she faced losing the only other person who had been a constant in her life, and she was facing it with the same quiet courage she had shown the day she saved Harrison from kidnappers. Hours passed. Stanley stabilized, but remained unconscious. Emma refused to leave his side even to eat, until Harrison gently insisted, taking her to the hospital cafeteria for a breakfast she barely touched. When they returned to the ICU, they found an unexpected visitor had arrived. Diana stood at Stanley's bedside, elegant even in hastily donned clothes, her expression unreadable as she studied the unconscious man. She turned as they entered, her eyes softening at the sight of Emma's tear-stained face. "Tyler called me," she explained to Harrison. "He said you hadn't shown up for your meeting this morning. When I couldn't reach you, I contacted your security team. They told me you were here." She paused, glancing again at Stanley. "I thought perhaps I should see for myself what all the fuss has been about." Harrison tensed, preparing for criticism or judgment, but Diana's next action surprised him. She knelt before Emma, bringing herself to the child's eye level. "You must be Emma," she said gently. "I'm Diana, Harrison's ex-wife. I understand your grandfather is very ill. I'm sorry you're going through this." Emma regarded her warily. "Are you mad at me too, like Tyler was?" Diana shook her head. "No, dear. Tyler was confused. We all were. Harrison has never been good at explaining himself." She glanced up at her ex-husband, a hint of their old familiarity in her wry expression. "But I think I'm beginning to understand." Harrison felt a rush of unexpected gratitude toward Diana. Whatever her initial suspicions, she was showing Emma kindness when the child needed it most. The day progressed with agonizing slowness. Stanley's condition remained critical but stable. Emma finally succumbed to exhaustion, falling asleep in a chair beside his bed, her head resting against Harrison's arm. Diana had left but returned hours later with fresh clothes for both Harrison and Emma, along with decent coffee and sandwiches from outside the hospital. "The children want to come," she told Harrison quietly as Emma slept. "They're concerned. About you." Harrison raised an eyebrow. "About me or about their inheritance going to medical bills for strangers?" Diana sighed. "That's not fair, Harrison. They're confused, yes. Hurt, even. You've suddenly invested yourself emotionally in this child and her grandfather after years of emotional distance from your own family. Can you blame them for feeling replaced? Put that way, Harrison could understand their perspective. I'm not replacing them, he said, looking down at Emma's sleeping form. I'm trying to learn from my mistakes, to be the kind of person who sees value beyond balance sheets and acquisitions. The kind of person you used to be, Diana said softly. Before success changed you. Harrison looked up, surprised by her comment. What do you mean? You weren't always so insulated, Harrison. When we first met when the children were small, you saw people, really saw them. Somewhere along the way, as the company grew and the money accumulated, you started seeing spreadsheets instead. Even your own family became a kind of project to be managed. The assessment was painful, but not entirely inaccurate. Harrison glanced at Stanley's still form, remembering their conversations, the older man's quiet dignity, his unwavering dedication to Emma. Stanley reminded me of that other person, he admitted. And Emma. Emma showed me what really matters, not by asking for anything, but by giving everything. Her courage, her trust, her forgiveness. Diana studied him thoughtfully. You love them. This odd little family you've found. Yes, Harrison said simply. I do. Before Diana could respond, Dr. Patel returned with a team of specialists. Their expressions were grave as they explained Stanley's deteriorating condition. His heart was failing, despite their interventions. Without a transplant, which, as they had explained earlier, was unlikely given his age and the shortage of donor organs, his prognosis was poor. How long? Harrison asked bluntly, after ensuring Emma was still asleep. Dr. Patel hesitated. Days, possibly only hours. I'm sorry, Mr. Shaw. The words hit with physical force. Harrison looked at Emma, peacefully unaware of the approaching loss, and felt utterly helpless, a foreign sensation for a man accustomed to solving problems with money and influence. Diana, witnessing his distress, made a decision. Harrison, go talk to the doctors privately. I'll stay with Emma. In a conference room down the hall, Harrison faced the medical team with the same intensity he brought to business negotiations. There must be something else we can try. Experimental treatments, clinical trials, something. The specialists exchanged glances. There is one possibility, Dr. Patel said reluctantly. A new procedure being developed at Mass General in Boston. Heard it's still experimental. A mechanical heart assist device specifically designed for elderly patients who aren't transplant candidates. But Mr. Mitchell would need to be transferred immediately, and even then, the chances of success are limited. Make it happen, Harrison said without hesitation. Whatever it costs, whatever strings need to be pulled, just save him. What followed was a whirlwind of activity. Medical arrangements, helicopter transport preparations, consent forms. When Emma woke, Harrison gently explained that her grandfather needed special care available only in Boston. Her questions were pointed, insightful, and heartbreaking in their directness. Is he going to die? She asked finally, her voice small but steady. Harrison knelt before her, holding her hands in his. The doctors are going to do everything possible to help him, he said truthfully. This new treatment in Boston might make his heart strong again. But it might not, Emma persisted, seeing through his careful phrasing. It might not, Harrison admitted, but we have to try, don't we? Emma nodded, her eyes filling with tears she fought to control. He's all I have, she whispered. No, Harrison said firmly. He's not all you have anymore. You have me too. No matter what happens, Emma, you will never be alone. I promise you that. The words emerged without premeditation, but as soon as Harrison spoke them, he recognized their truth. Regardless of what happened with Stanley, he would ensure Emma was cared for, loved, protected, not out of obligation or gratitude, but because she had become essential to him, a daughter of his heart, if not his blood. Diana, who had been quietly observing, stepped forward. You have more than just Harrison, she said, surprising them. Both. You have me as well. And when they come to their senses, Tyler and Megan too. Harrison looked at his ex-wife with newfound appreciation. Despite their years of conflict and estrangement, Diana was offering support when it mattered most. Some essential decency, some core of compassion he had forgotten she possessed, was asserting itself in this crisis. As they prepared for Stanley's transfer to Boston, the hospital room door opened again. Tyler stood there, looking uncomfortable but determined, with Megan close behind him. They entered hesitantly, their eyes moving from their father to Emma, to the unconscious man in the bed. "Dad," Tyler began awkwardly, "Mom told us what's happening. We wanted to see if we could help." Harrison was momentarily speechless, moved by his son's unexpected appearance and offer. Before he could respond, Emma spoke up. "You were mean before," she said directly. To Tyler, her protective instincts toward Harrison emerging despite her own distress. "You hurt Mr. Shaw's feelings." Tyler flushed, taken aback by the child's forthrightness. Yes, I was rude. I'm sorry about that." "It's my grandpa who's sick," Emma continued, her voice trembling slightly. "Mr. Shaw is trying to help him get better. If you're going to be mean again, you should leave." The adults in the room exchanged glances, simultaneously impressed and heartbroken by Emma's protective stance. Tyler, to his credit, approached her, directly and knelt to her eye level, much as Diana had done earlier. "I won't be mean again," he promised. "I was confused and jealous, I guess, but that was wrong of me. I'd like to help if I can." Emma studied him suspiciously for a moment, then relented. "Okay, but be nice to your dad. He's been really good to me and Grandpa." The simple reprimand, delivered with such earnest conviction, hit harder than any adult criticism could have. Tyler glanced at his father, genuine remorse in his expression. "I will." Over the next several hours, as Stanley was prepared for transfer, something remarkable happened. The Shaw family, Harrison, Diana, Tyler, and Megan, united around Emma, providing comfort, distraction, and support. Megan taught Emma to draw, sketching pictures they could send with Stanley to brighten his hospital room in Boston. Tyler, who had indeed designed video games in California, showed her simple coding techniques on his laptop. Diana brushed and re-braided Emma's hair, her practiced maternal gestures coming back naturally, despite the years since her own children had needed such care. Harrison, watching his fractured family come together for this child in crisis, felt a surge of hope amidst the fear and uncertainty. Whatever happened with Stanley, Emma would not face it alone. She had somehow accomplished what years of family therapy and his own half-hearted efforts had failed to do. She had brought the Shaws together again, not as perfect or completely healed, but present and trying. As the medical team prepared to move Stanley to the helipad, Emma was allowed a moment alone with her grandfather. Harrison couldn't hear what she whispered to him, but he saw her slip something into Stanley's hand, a small object that glinted in the harsh hospital lighting. One of her treasured painted rocks, he realized, a talisman of love and hope to accompany him on his journey. The following days passed in a blur of hospital visits, medical consultations, and anxious waiting. The procedure in Boston was performed successfully, but Stanley's recovery remained uncertain. Harrison arranged for a private apartment near the hospital, where he and Emma could stay, with Diana, Tyler, and Megan rotating visits to provide support and company. Christmas came and went, celebrated quietly in Stanley's hospital room with a small tree Emma decorated herself. New Year's followed, bringing with it both hope and anxiety about what the coming months would hold. It was mid-January when Stanley finally opened his eyes properly, consciousness returning gradually after weeks of sedation and limited awareness. Emma was reading aloud from a book Harrison had brought her, her clear voice stumbling occasionally over difficult words. Harrison sat nearby, checking emails on his tablet while maintaining a watchful presence. "That's not how you pronounce archipelago, sweetheart," Stanley said weakly, his voice rough from disuse. Emma's book clattered to the floor as she leapt up. "Grandpa, you're awake." Harrison rose quickly, pressing the call button for the nurse while Emma carefully hugged her grandfather, mindful of the tubes and wires still connecting him to various machines. The doctors were cautiously optimistic. The mechanical heart assist device was functioning well, and Stanley's other organs were recovering from the strain they had endured. He would need ongoing medical care, careful monitoring and significant lifestyle adjustments, but his prognosis had improved from terminal to manageable. As January turned to February, plans needed to be made. The Mitchell house on Pine Street, with its broken steps and inadequate heating, was clearly unsuitable for Stanley's recovery. The second-floor bedroom would be inaccessible to him for months, possibly permanently, given his weakened state. "He can have the guest cottage at my estate," Harrison proposed during a family conference that included Emma, the Shaws, and Stanley's medical team. "It's all on one level, fully accessible, and I can arrange for medical equipment and home health care." Stanley, still weak but increasingly alert, shook his head. "I appreciate the offer, Harrison, but I can't accept charity housing." "It's not charity," Harrison insisted. "It's practical. Emma starts at Westbrook Academy next week. The scholarship arrangements were finalized while you were ill. The cottage is 5 minutes from the school. Your current house is 30 minutes away in good traffic." "He's right, Grandpa," Emma added. "And Mr. Shaw said I could plant a bigger garden at the cottage, with vegetables and flowers, just like Mom's." Stanley looked at his granddaughter, seeing her excitement despite her attempts to appear merely practical. "You'd like that, wouldn't you? Living close to the school, having a bigger garden?" Emma nodded, then added honestly, "And being near. Mr. Shaw and Mrs. Diana and Tyler and Megan, they've been really nice while you were sleeping." Stanley's eyebrows rose at this revelation. He glanced at Harrison, who nodded confirmation. During Stanley's illness, the Shaw family had indeed rallied around Emma, finding in her needs a common purpose that began to heal their own fractured relationships. "I still can't accept a free home," Stanley maintained stubbornly. Diana, who had been quiet during this exchange, spoke up. "What about a business arrangement? Harrison mentioned you have experience in gardening and property maintenance. The estate grounds are extensive, and the current landscaping company is overpriced and underperforming." Tyler caught on immediately. "Dad's always complaining about them. You could consult on the redesign of the East Gardens at least. Supervise the work when you're stronger." Stanley considered this, his pride wrestling with practicality. "I do know a thing or two about proper landscaping," he admitted. "Those fancy companies often focus on appearance over sustainability." "Then it's settled," Harrison said, recognizing the compromise for what it was. A way for Stanley to maintain his dignity while accepting the help he needed. "You'll oversee the grounds and live in the cottage as part of your compensation package. Emma will attend Westbrook and help with your new garden when she's not studying." Emma looked from her grandfather to Harrison, hope brightening her features. "Does this mean we get to stay together, all of us?" The simple question cut to the heart of what was really being decided, not just living arrangements, but the formation of a new kind of family, unconventional but no less real for its unusual origins. "Yes," Harrison answered, looking to Stanley for confirmation. "If that's what you want." Stanley studied Harrison for a long moment, seeing beyond the wealth and power to the man beneath, a man who had been transformed by his granddaughter's simple courage and compassion, a man who had opened his home and heart to strangers, and in doing so, found his way back to his own family. "I think," Stanley said slowly, "that would be acceptable. On a trial basis, of course." Emma's joyful reaction said everything that needed saying. 3 months later, on a warm spring afternoon, Harrison stood on the terrace of his estate, watching as life unfolded around him with a vibrancy he had once thought permanently lost. In the cottage garden, Emma and Stanley worked side by side, planting tomato seedlings in the rich soil. Stanley moved more slowly now, careful of his still healing heart, but his eyes were bright with purpose and satisfaction. The mechanical device that assisted his heart required ongoing medical supervision, but he had adapted to its limitations, with characteristic resilience. Nearby, Megan sat at an easel, capturing the scene in watercolors. She had extended her visit indefinitely, finding unexpected inspiration in the evolving family dynamic and Emma's uninhibited creativity. Tyler, too, had lingered longer than planned, working remotely from Connecticut instead of returning to California. His gaming company was developing an educational app based partly on Emma's enthusiastic input about what made learning fun for kids her age. Even Diana visited regularly, her initial skepticism replaced by genuine affection for Emma and grudging respect for Stanley. She and Harrison had established a tentative truce, their shared concern for Emma, creating common ground where years of acrimony had prevailed. As Harrison watched this tableau, the unlikely family he had found, and the original family slowly healing, he reflected on the strange path that had led him here. A business meeting cancelled, a return home at an unexpected hour. A small girl with the courage to warn a stranger of danger instead of running away. Such small moments, such seemingly random chances, yet they had altered the course of so many lives. His own most profoundly. The man who had once measured success in acquisitions and assets now found it in Emma's laughter, in Stanley's grudging friendship, in his own children's gradual return to his life. "Penny for your thoughts," Diana said, joining him at the terrace railing. Harrison smiled. "Just thinking about the day Emma saved me from those kidnappers, how different everything would be if she hadn't been there." Diana nodded thoughtfully. "She saved you in more ways than one, didn't she?" "Yes," Harrison admitted. "She did." They watched as Emma ran across the lawn, calling for them to come see the first tomato blossom of the season, a small white flower that promised fruit to come. Harrison and Diana exchanged a glance, then moved together toward the garden, toward the extraordinary ordinary life that had blossomed from a moment of danger and a child's simple courage. Harrison Shaw, who once had everything money could buy, and nothing that truly mattered, now understood what real wealth looked like. It looked like Emma's smile as she proudly showed him the tomato blossom. It looked like Stanley's nod of approval as Harrison correctly identified a garden pest. It looked like his own children, gradually finding their way back to him through the bridge Emma had unknowingly built. It looked like family, not perfect, not without challenges, but real and present and trying. Every single day, trying. And, in the end, Harrison realized, that was the greatest fortune anyone could hope to amass, not measured in dollars or possessions, but in moments of connection, in lives intertwined, in the courage to begin again no matter how many times you've lost your way. In Emma's words, sometimes bad things lead to good things. Sometimes the darkest moments light the path to where you were always meant to be.